Hi, and welcome to Yeti at Large. This is a channel focused on making the most out of what you have, no matter where you're at. Thanks for tuning in and helping out. Today we're going to make a batch of teriyaki salmon with some cabbage, lo mein. I'm going to start by doing our mise en place the night before. I always trim my cabbages by cleaning out the core, cutting them into fours, and then julienning them down. Sometimes the core doesn't always disagree. You'll see that I cross my knife occasionally, which is not a textbook approach, but I've been handling chef knives for so long. Here's my shredded cabbage. I'm not going to cut it too fine, but I will go by and find the places that are thicker and try to get the mass down to a reasonable size. We'll store the cabbage in a Tupperware container overnight. You can see the technique here is to ride on that middle section of your finger so that the tips of your fingers are never exposed to the knife blade. I use the big cutting board for YouTube because I like you guys. You can see the yakisoba noodles in the background. We'll feature those more in just a second. Got a fillet of salmon. This is a Marine Stewardship Council approved salmon. My skinning technique is to take a rather dull chef knife, get a little bit of the skin started, holding the knife down and pulling the skin out from underneath it. You can see that sometimes it fights you a little bit, but it rolls right up and comes clean. Sometimes I cook with the skin on. This time I wasn't gonna. After we get washed up from skinning the salmon and dry our hands so that we're not working a wet knife, I'll check for the pin bones along that line. They did a good job of getting them clean. I always check the backside as well. We're not going to do anything fancy with this salmon. We're just going to cut it into small fillets because I want to portion this out. We're doing a little bit of meal planning here, and we want the leftovers to hold as long as possible. I do like this M.S.C. salmon. It's very fatty. It cooks up pretty luxurious. I've always been more of a fan of the cheek side of the fish and less of the tail. There's a lot you can do with the tail end of it, not necessarily sautéing it. But for our purpose today, we're just going to cut the whole thing up and cook it all. I like to put it up on the ends and put the two portions back to back to keep the portion control in a good size. Sometimes I'll cook up that little tail section and give it to the dogs too. So a pretty ugly little onion. I cut off the bad stuff, and I'm just cutting little fingers because since this is going in the lo mein, I want the shape to mimic the julienne shape of the cabbage and the noodles to get a pretty consistent look when the whole dish is assembled. You can see I got quite a bit of waste in my peel. I went back through and cleaned that up a little bit. I like to blanch those green vegetables before I saute them. Brings the sugars to the edge. Here's our teriyaki sauce we made ahead of time. This is a very simple recipe. 4 ounces of soy sauce, 3 ounces of granulated sugar, a spoonful of frozen concentrated orange juice, and a little bit of ginger. With the orange juice, make sure that you don't have any pulp in it. I like a nice, smooth teriyaki sauce. Happened to be the end of all those items. Here's our Fortune yakisoba noodles. I blanched those in a little hot water ahead of time and wrapped them up. These are the hot and spicy ones, and they mean hot and spicy. We're not going to add that in today's dish. Now that I've blanched my cabbage for about a minute, look how bright green it is. It's not fully cooked. And I'm going to go ahead and blanch the onions. Notice got a little jazz in the background. Checking to see if the pan's hot enough for my lo mein. I'll begin by putting 1 portion of onion down. I wanted to show you what a general portion size would look, so I'm not cooking it all at once. Might look like a generous pour of olive oil, but you'll see that I won't oil the pan again throughout the entire process. And making the lo mein, you need just a little bit of fat in it. The noodles and the cabbage will suck all that up and you won't know it's there. So this is 1 portion for the blanched onions, 1 portion of the blanched cabbage, and 1 portion of the blanched yakisoba noodles. You can substitute other noodles, but I like that rough, coarse texture. In a hot pan, and you just toss it, and we're going to saute it, quote, stir fry it, until we get a little bit of color on everything, the noodles, the onions, and the cabbage. All I'm going to do is put a tiny amount of Himalayan pink salt, a tiny amount of fresh ground pepper. You can use white pepper if you want to stay true to more of a Szechuan or Cantonese style, and a little bit of my powdered ginger. I don't like loading my lo mein up with sauce because after we cook the salmon, the sauce is going to get into the lo mein anyway, and I hate over saucing my food. I like it to be bright, clean, and let the food be the flavor with the sauce helping it, not the other way around. This is the part of the process where I set off the smoke alarms in the house and drew a lot of attention to myself. This house doesn't have a really good exhaust fan like the other one. Putting the lo mein on the plate, I now put my salmon in a very hot pan, and I will cook it for about 30 seconds on each side for this size of the portion. Get the grease off the camera lens. You can see it gets a good caramelization, good color. And now let's ladle a little bit of this teriyaki sauce onto the salmon after we reduce down the fond on the pan with a little white wine. I like to steam it for just a moment to ensure that it's cooked all the way through, but not lose that good char we've got on the outside. I did boil the teriyaki sauce for about a minute when I made it. Took it off the heat and set it aside in the back. It may seem a little runny when it's in the pan, but when you finish whatever it is you're cooking, whether it's chicken teriyaki, salmon, or even a vegetarian approach, the teriyaki sauce will reduce quickly in a hot pan. I like having a little bit of fond with the white wine there. There's a whole lot of flavor in that little bit of juice. And then I just put a couple of ladles of the teriyaki right on top, and you'll see it'll boil up hard and quick. There's a lot of sugar in this, even though it's not terribly sweet, so you'll get a thickening happening very quickly. I'll turn it on a couple of sides, but be very gentle not to break the salmon apart. At this point, it wants to fall apart on you, and I want a nice pretty piece for the final picture. After all, it's YouTube. We have to have that finished shot with the plated meal. So here's my plated meal I'm getting ready to do, and all of a sudden it was gone. I turned my back and my show plate was gone. I asked for the plate to be returned and I got a half-eaten portion back. So instead of the nice fancy show plate, we went ahead and cooked up the rest of it, and here it is casserole style. Teriyaki salmon with cabbage.